are going to come from all over the world to see it. It is the largest gathering of diesels that I know of, at least since '85, and this may be even a larger gathering of diesels. And whether you really like Spencer and the crowds and the heat or anything at all, this is for you to go down and see, and for you to experience stuff that you will probably never get the opportunity to experience again. I've gone to stuff, and I can tell you this is a winner, regardless of what they do down there. For us as modelers, you will see what made up the transition period. And my aha experience that Rob spoke about was I came to the conclusion that I didn't really know what the transition period is. And I'll ask you, do you know what the transition period is? And everybody says, oh, that's when the diesels came and the steam left. Well, that's true, but there's really early transition period and late transition period. Early transition period is what's going to be at Spencer. And by that, I mean any time before 1949. And this is when the diesels took over. And us as transition era modelers need to think about what's really right on the layout. And what's right on the layout is F units and E units. Jeeps didn't come out until 49, well after the war. And that's what we tend to think of. But that's not what actually got rid of steam. The engine that got rid of steam, and these are models of what's going to be down at Spencer, was the FT set, which this is the club. This belongs to the club. And this FT set, we call the diesel that did. Prior to the coming out of the FT set, from say 34 to 39, a lot of experimental things were done, and we have seen them from the standpoint of the M1000 and all the goofy looking stuff that Brian brings in and has, and some really neat looking stuff. But they were never practical. They were built in quantities of sometimes onesies, foursies, but not any real quantity. And they really didn't have their act together as far as what to build. And these are what we call distillate locomotives, originally is what they called them, because they didn't really know what they were going to run. Some ran on gasoline, some ran on oil, straight like heating oil, and then we finally came to the diesel, which became practical. So those early distillate locomotives are not here. Most of them haven't been served, and we're not really going to talk about those because there were too few. They weren't really in the South and so forth. But the FT was, as we said, the diesel that did it. They came out in 39, and they actually built them from 39 to 45, all throughout the war. That's because EMD was not a steam locomotive builder, and as a result of that, they could keep building diesels. Alco tried some experiments, government shut them down. FM tried some diesels, government shut them down. They needed everything FM could produce for submarines and PT boats or LSD codes. So the bottom line was EMD was allowed to make progress, and the FT set was the engine. It is highly identifiable for us because it is the only F unit, set this down here, that has 4 exhaust stacks. All other Fs have 2. No matter what they are, they got 2. So that is a real distinguishing feature on it. And they made the engines that look like this FT we have here. And the FT demonstrators that ran all over the country are going to be at Spencer. I went up to Chicago when they first put them out, and they got them out from, I can't remember where they were, and painted them and put them out. And I went up to Chicago in '85 to see them. I mean, I was not to go to Chicago. They had a weekend in which they were going to show them, and I went to EMD to see them. That's the last major gathering of diesels that I know of. So to give you an idea, that was 25 years ago. It gives you an idea of just how important this thing is to get pulled off. When he made the FT sets, the unions went berserk, and that was because of the fact that they eliminated a job, 2 jobs. You didn't need an engineer and a fireman on the second engine. So if you're used to having steam with 2 people on it, you didn't need to have it. So in order to calm the unions down, they permanently coupled, or semi-permanently, they put in a mechanical drawbar, just as we do here at the club, between the A unit and the B unit. And that was to get the unions quiet. Apparently, it depended a little bit where in the country you were as to how much this bothered the unions, and some of them actually had couplers. And once this kind of, I guess there was a court settlement or something along the way that said that you did not have to have a fireman and an engineer on the second unit, they ended up putting couplers on. But originally they were put together. And they are true to the diesel that made it possible for us to have diesels take the place of steam. They were the very first practical system. However, I should mention this, before them, there were the E units. And the E units actually came out in smaller numbers, but they were out there. And the E units began in '37 and continued in production of one sort or another for quite a while. The first ones I will mention is the EA. There's not going to be one down at Spencer. There is one in the B&O Museum. That's the only EA surviving. And they only made 6 of them, so you can't expect a whole lot down there. And they went on and made some others, an E1 and an E2, but they weren't really practical. The E3s came out, and the E3s had something in common with the FTs, and that was they both used the 567 diesel. As a matter of fact, all the F units have 567 diesels. All the E units have 567 prime movers. Now, what the 567 means that was the displacement of the cylinder. It has nothing to do with the total power of that particular locomotive or that particular engine block, let's say prime mover engine block, because that was determined by the number of cylinders. They started out putting 6 cylinders, 567, 6 cylinders. They are straight, they are inline engines. And they ended up going all the way up, I guess, to 16 as the maximum. So when they wanted to make a more powerful locomotive, they just had another set of cylinders on. They called it the 567. Why? Because the cubic displacement of the engine was 567 cubic inches.
One cylinder.
One cylinder, right, per cylinder. I don't mean the whole unit, but the per cylinder, as Brian said. And so they didn't make the cylinders any bigger, they just added more of them. And apparently they only added them in units of 2, and from what I can figure out, every unit of 2 got you about 200 horsepower more. So they kept adding these on. They used the 567 diesel. Well, the main thing down at Spencer would be to see some of these early engines. Now, they do not have an E4 down there, an E3 or an E4. They will have an E5. Now, E5 is extremely rare. There was 11 of them built, 1 survives. And that engine is from the Illinois Railroad Museum. Joe and I have seen that engine. However, every time I've ever been there, and I've been there 4 times, it's always been in the shed. It is gorgeous. It is chrome fluted. The whole locomotive is chrome fluted. The B unit is chrome fluted, not about the fluting. And all the car sets are chrome fluted. They're not bringing the car set down, but they are bringing down. And I guess that ran on the Burlington Zephyr. Somebody may correct me on that.
Nebraska.
Yeah, the Nebraska Zephyr. Okay, yes. It ran out there on the Nebraska Zephyr. The only one they ever built. And fortunately, it's been saved. But we're in 1940 by then. And then we look at the E6 came out in 39 to 42. And the E6 had the slant nose, as we have, got it here somewhere. Yeah, this is an E6 with Southern E6. And I don't really think Southern had any earlier E units. And as you know, N&W had no E units, no F units. So we just put them out of our picture. but the slant nose here, this nose is more slanted, I'm trying to hold on an angle, than a standard E unit or an F unit. The E6, we are fortunate that one of the 3 surviving E6s lives at Spencer, and that is the Atlantic Coastline E6, and it will be on display down there. A lot of you may have seen that. It's in the purple Atlantic Coastline color. But it still was a very valuable locomotive to have. And they only made 90 of them, so that's not a lot. So we got 1 in 90 sitting down at Spencer, so we are indeed fortunate to have that. And that fits on our railroad because it was 39 to 42, that early transition period. But still, you got 90 engines compared to the number of steam engines, not a whole lot. So they went on through the war years, and not much was done in development. But by gosh, after the war, EMD was posed to jump, and they did. And in '47, they came out with the E7, and I don't think we have one of those, and the E8. Kind of just move some papers here so I can explain a little more. In the freight department, you had the F2s, the F3s, which will be down at Spencer. This is a Southern F3 off the club layout. So we have one of those here, fits in the time period. This, for whatever reason, this is mine, but this is an F2, and I think it was more of a internal differences than anything external. You know, you can't go by horn placement. The railroads did that on their own, and you notice that you do have the typical bulldoze nose. But these are two, an F3 and F2, and I really can't see a lot of difference in them at all. And we call the windows in here portholes. These have 3 portholes. Your F unit, your FT, in addition to having 4 stacks, it's the only one with 4 portholes close together. Okay? So we will see those at Spencer. And next came out was the F7, and they jumped the horsepower. The horsepower on these was 1,500 horsepower, but they had moved the 567 to a 16-cylinder engine, up from 12 cylinders. So that's how they got their power. I always thought about, how did they make these engines more powerful? They just added on another couple more cylinders, which extended the length of the engine some when it would fit, and so that's where we got our large numbers. Now the F3, 1,100 of those, the F7, 2,200. So you can see those really made an impact. They are after the war, right there at the end of the war. So that's what really took steam out. But the beginning proof was the FT set. And that's what really did it. And we call that the diesel that did it, because that's the diesel that made steam go away. So we have this early transition period in there up to the end of the war, and maybe right at it. Some things kind of overlap a little bit. And we also had another set of engines that are interesting, both in Southern, mine, and that is the F7 and the FP7. The FP7 has a steam generator on it and was used for passenger service. As we can see here, you can see the steam generator sticking up. Okay? And it is, if I can hold all this correctly, notice, and I've got these lined up, it is slightly longer. It had to be longer to accommodate the steam generator. These are going to be down at Spencer. Okay? And so they ran the same horsepower, it just had that steam generator for passenger service, and it also had another major difference. The gearing on the locomotive was set up for higher speed, less pull power, and so that made a difference too. The F7s had greater pulling, greater tonnage power, because they had lower gearing. It's like running a car. You shift to low, you've got more pull. You shift into high, you don't have as much pull. That was the difference in those two. So that gets us up to the end of the war as far as what was made. And we might add that the F7s were made all the way into '53. Most of us from grammar school. I don't think anybody graduated high school yet. But anyway, But anyway, it gives you an idea. If we're modeling a time frame, these engines would be appropriate because they all came out in that late steam era. Well, on the other side of the coin was the Alcos. Alco was very much penalized by the war effort. And why were they penalized by the war effort? Because they were not allowed to build diesels. And they had to wait to the end of the war. Fairbanks Morris was in the same boat. I don't know if any of the Fairbanks Morris sea liners are still available. I think there's some at IRM, Illinois Railroad Museum, but I'm not. I think there's some in Milwaukee, but I can't remember. But they couldn't build any. So when we look at the late transition period, what we see is EMD is just taking everybody for a ride. Every railroad is throwing money into EMD to get rid of steam. And the reason, of course, they wanted to get rid of steam was the maintenance. All the problems and maintenance and lack of interchangeability, and we're not going to go through all that. But Fairbanks Morris, Alco got into the game after the war in '46 and came out with the FA, and you see here, this is in Tennessee Central, and by the way, there is one of these running in Nashville. So, but this will also be at Spencer, will be an FA. Okay? It happens to be an FPA from Canada, and it has the steam generator in it, but it was the one that they were able to get to come down, Canada. Now, the jewel of the collection that's going to be there, of course, before I get to that one, let me back up to EMD, I'm sorry. EMD went on to do the E7s. There are no E7s going to be at the museum. The next thing they did, of course, was the E8. And this locomotive in Wabash will be at the museum. And then, generously, Roy had, I'm just going to show his shell here, but this is Roy's shell for an E8. Most of us have seen this run. Here, they ran them here until Southern completely dropped and Amtrak took over the Crescent. So these things are appropriate from the end of the war all the way up to probably what, 10 years ago? I can't remember when they quit the Crescent. Say 2000, something like that. These ran right up here through Greensboro. We, as a club, would go out at night and see them. We would go get something to eat, go over there, because they came into Greensboro at 1 and 2 in the morning. And we would sit out there with coffee and wait for them to come in and take pictures and go home. So we were a little bit more, a lot of us were younger. But this Wabash engine will be there. It is the 10,000th locomotive that EMD built. And it gives you an idea of EMD's power as far as making a locomotive. It's the 10,000th one, and I can't remember exactly what year this was built. Forgive me, but I don't really know that. But it had to be built. Let me put you in here just a second. I had it written down. I say I had it written down. Now these were built. Oh, I had it somewhere. Anyway, it's an E8, and so it was built. It was the last of the E units built. Okay. So that's going to be there. Let me back up to my Alco story. I'm sorry. The FA was their freight engine, and they came out with the most beautiful locomotive design perhaps ever in some of our opinions, and that was the PA, passenger engine. I might add that all of these six-wheel truck locomotives are is a powered wheel, a dummy, and a powered. They're A1A. None of them have all six wheels powered as we think of on an SD. This locomotive here is the famous Santa Fe PA, you can see. And they built these engines, I'll tell you what years they built those. They started all the stuff for Alco started after the war, and they built these beginning in this particular model in 1952 was the PAs. These are PA3s. Now they made 49 of them. They weren't real common, but they were used a lot in Santa Fe, New York Central, Quincy, Southern, and I forgot to bring my Southern set, but Southern even had a pair of them.
Nickel plate usually.
And nickel plate.
Bluebird.
Southern
Yes.
Pacific did too.
And Southern Pacific, and a bunch of them. I don't think Burlington did. Missouri Pacific had them, but they were a lot of places. They are beautiful locomotives. This engine, when it went off the Santa Fe, was sold to the Delaware and Hudson and ended up in this paint scheme. Okay? And it then was sold to Mexico. It and two sisters went to Mexico. They were repainted in Mexico, and I'm not sure if they ran all three of them or they just ran two of them. We know they went down there and were really just run out. They just ran everything out of them. They didn't maintain them. They didn't do anything with them. And they sat in Mexico for a good 10 years. They had been painted into the NDM paint scheme, which is black and yellow for Mexico. And then a very wonderful thing happened. Doyle McCormick from Portland bought two of them. How he got them out of there and all that is a political story unto itself, because Congress got involved, and the president, a lot of people, Mexico did not want to let go of these engines, mainly because they knew the U.S. wanted them. And two of them did come back. The third one is still left in Mexico. And they came back in pretty poor condition. One of them is going to be restored and put in the Smithsonian strictly as a shell. There's nothing there. It's just going to be a locomotive shell. Doyle has redone one of these engines into the nickel plate 120. And it is going to be here. It is not runnable yet. As far as I know, everything I've read said he's got a lot of it done, but not all of it. And getting that locomotive out of Portland to here is a major accomplishment. To get the railroads to pull this thing and to get it to let go, because it is the only one that's really left. And it is a great locomotive to see. I saw it in Portland and have seen it up there, and it will be here. By the way, Doyle McCormick is responsible for the 4449 and responsible for steam on the American Freedom Train. Doyle was the engineer for the American Freedom Train. And any of you that happen to see it, Doyle was the engineer. And the 4449, beautiful GS4, that's in Southern Pacific, called the Southern Pacific Daylight Colors. All of that's thanks to Doyle McCormick. Just as tight as he's a hell of a nice guy. And I have met him and talked to him some, spent time going through the nickel plate engine. You know, he said, here, go have fun. So, you know, I just did that. But he does have the thing where it's now cosmetically finished. He has fired up the prime movers. I think the part that's missing is the interconnection between the prime mover and the trucks and all that stuff still got to be done. But anyway, it will be here. Some stuff's available in N-Gauge. Here's a N-Gauge, for those of you that N-Gauge, here's an N-Gauge PA. In Southern, I might add. Got that one. And all of this lasted until they started making something else. And in 1946, they came out, I should say maybe it was 45, they came out with what they call the BL2. Ugliest locomotive ever. But anyway, they did come out with the BL2, and it was the first locomotive that you did not have to turn them. You know, unlike this, you know, we've got one end looking out, and kind of stuck. That you didn't have to turn it, and we've probably had some BL2s floating around here. And a few railroads did buy them, and they called it the branch line locomotive, and it was never intended to do any more than let somebody run up and down a branch line and be able to look back out of the cab and see to back up. So we come out in 1949 with this. This is a GP7, and pretty much everybody started buying these because they were truly the locomotive you didn't have to turn around. You had visibility both ways, and I think we all know about Jeeps. But they had one other advantage that does not ever get mentioned. And they have one real important factor. I'm trying to see which one I can show this to you on the desk. I'll use this one. This locomotive was one of the damnedest things to ever service ever came out. Why? Because this locomotive was built on a truss. It is like a truss bridge on wheels. The sides of it are truss. If you've ever seen the sides off of an E unit or an F unit, you will see cross members, diagonals, because it is a truss bridge. And I'm sure Michael can tell us about building trusses, but it is a typical truss. You couldn't take anything out of this locomotive without having a crane to lift it out of the top of the engine. That's why there's all these hatches on the top. If you've ever noticed, there's tons of hatches on the top of an E unit and F unit. That's so they could get a generator out, a cylinder out, a prime mover out, whatever they had to get out. They had to take it out that way, making it very difficult to service. And that's probably what helped kill them off, was the servicing style. And they were getting old. And this was, bi-directional and everything else. This, as we know, we talk about a hood unit, it's nothing more. When you pull off this shell, you're doing what a locomotive manufacturer could do, or a rebuild shop or a shop. They're pulling that top shell off, and now they can get anything. And that's what made the G work. That Alco followed along the same theory with the RSDs and with the RS units, but that's basically what went on. So when we as modelers talk about what we're going to do and build, we're in the transition era, we need a lot of these kind of engines, because this is what ran in the transition era. And as I say, you have the opportunity to see them down at Spencer. And I've made up a list here. If you're going to Spencer, take one. If you know somebody else one, this is the list of engines as of today. The FT set was added today. We kind of knew about it yesterday, but it wasn't firm, but it is now. And I did put some notes down there about what they are, when they were built. I did add some notes on there, just to give you some things to think about. But I urge you to go see them. If you can only spend an hour or two down there, do it. I mean, really, it's a great thing. And people are coming from Tokyo, they're coming from South America, they're coming from England, they're coming from all over the world, because this is the greatest gathering of American diesels that there has been, at least since '85, and I'm not even sure that, I don't think, '85 was strictly an EMD show, so that's what's not here are any Fairbanks Morris stuff, any Baldwin stuff, and they built, like the Centipede. I don't even think any of those exist, but that's what's not here, and what's here is great. There are, at the moment, 26 sets, or 26, I don't know how sometimes they count the A unit separate from the B unit, and sometimes they're AB together, so. But they're basically 26 different items to go see down there, and they'll be around the turntable, and they will be running them. And just go to the website, NCTM, is that right? Okay. And you can see what's going to be there. You can see the program, and you can do it. If you order tickets online, and I think the last day to get tickets online is going to be Monday, and it's $5 cheaper to get them online, and you pay for it with credit card online. And after that, you'll have to buy them on site. And I don't remember, I know the first day is $45, and then the other days are less. But the reason for that is that's a press day. They are limiting the number of people that are available. And I think there was 30-something tickets left for Thursday. I think that's what David told me last night. So I don't know. But anyway, if you're going to go, pick a day, go, spend some time down there and see what the transition era looks like. And oh, by the way, Jay's going to be there. But, the J will already be in position. There was originally thought they were going to drag it in on that day, and they decided it was too dangerous for too many people running around, so it's already going to be there. For all of you that have seen the J, for us, it's home turf. For people from Japan, I'm sure it's not, so they're going to be moving an eye over it. And it's kind of, they're here, and here's the list. You all pass that around, take one. If you want more than one, take more than one. If you think you're going to need one, give somebody else do it. I ran those also so we would have them. That's a little hard to get off the website. I have to be a little bit creative to